While staying with matters of the SABC, it's unclear if Hlaudi Motsoeneng will abide by the High Court ruling which stipulates that he cannot hold any position at the SABC. The court ruled yesterday that his appointment as Corporate Affairs Group Executive was unlawful. Judge Owen Rogers also ordered that fresh disciplinary proceedings be instituted against him. Motsoeneng's lawyer, Advocate Zola Majavu, joins us on the line now. Good morning to you, Mr. Majavu. Thanks for your time. Firstly, is Mr. Motsoeneng going to show up for work today?
Firstly, let me start off by saying two things, and I'll deal with your answer directly just now. As a lawyer, I do two things. I give advice which may or may not be accepted by a client as they're entitled to do so. And secondly, all lawyers act on clients' instructions. With regard to where to from here now, I am unable to indicate that because I am yet to take instructions. I'm consulting with Mr. Motsoeneng either later today or tomorrow, as I am currently busy with another case. With regard to whether or not he is showing up for work, he is not showing up for work today. As a precautionary measure, I gave advice to him, which advice he accepted, that he should not report for work to avoid a situation where he may be rightly or wrongly perceived as being contemptuous to the court. In any event, I wrote to the SABC as his employer yesterday to say, in the light of the court decision, please indicate to me so that I can advise my client accordingly whether or not you as the employer are going to abide the court's decision or are you going to take this matter on appeal. As I'm talking to you now, I am yet to receive a response from the SABC. And the holding position is that until the SABC as his employer responds, I think it would be prudent for him not to show up for work and also to afford him an opportunity perhaps to sit back and reflect, because the court judgment set aside the decision of his employer to appoint him. The court did not, contrary to what the DA is making people believe, the court did not terminate his employment with the SABC. If the court did that, there would therefore be no basis on which the court directed that a fresh DC should be instituted. I think extension of logic tells you that the employer has a right to discipline an employee for as long as he is within their employ. So if the interpretation that the DA is punting at the moment is correct, then it means they are suggesting that the court is wrong in suggesting that a DC should be held. But I want to stay out of those issues for now, other than to say he is not going to be at work. As soon as I receive his instructions, only then would I be able to advise you further as to what our course of action would be. I'm also not at liberty as a good lawyer not to disclose publicly what my advice to my client is, because it is governed by attorney-client privilege, other than to say he must be seen to be respectful of the court's decisions while reserving his labor law and constitutional rights in full. That is where the issue is at the moment. He's not at work, and we are consulting later today.
Mr. Majavu, in terms of his employee status, there's a lot been said about that, as you've mentioned. From what you and your client understand, what is his current standing in terms of his employee at the SABC?
That's a question that must be directed at his employer. What the court did not do, the court did not say he ceases to be an employee. What the court said is that until two things happen, he may not occupy a position at the SABC. A position is not necessarily synonymous with employment. What the court said is until the public protector's report is set aside or until he goes to a DC and the DC exonerates him, he may not lawfully occupy a position. So it is not indefinite. So there's a chance that the public protector's report may be set aside on which this DC is anchored. We don't know, because it is the SABC itself that currently took that report on review in the Johannesburg High Court. That court process is still underway, and we don't know what will become of that particular review. With regard to the DC, it is not Motsoeneng who is responsible to DC to subject himself to a DC. Other than saying to the court he would be prejudiced if he subjected to a second DC, because he went through a DC in December already. But if the court were to be minded in that direction, he indicated on record far back then that he has no difficulty subjecting himself to another DC, as long as it is a DC conducted under the auspices of his employer and not it being dictated by the DA, as they attempted to do. We even went so far as agreeing in principle on the name of a retired judge who can act as an independent chairperson. I'm not at liberty to disclose that, but it's just a point that needs to be made to indicate that Mr. Motsoeneng is not necessarily averse to going before a second DC, however prejudicial it may be. He will abide by that. But that is something that must be done by his employer and not himself. Lastly, you see, people are fixated with dealing with the character. I, for one, must be the first one to admit that my client is a very colorful character, as some people perceive him. But that does not detract from the rights that he has both under the Constitution and in the labor law. So to the extent that his employer must make certain decisions, we must allow the employer space to consult, take advice, and then act accordingly. And once the employer has decided to act and communicated its decision, only then would I be in a better position to advise my client. And that is what all lawyers do. There is nothing exceptional about it. There are still further remedies available to him, to the minister, to the SABC. Whether or not those parties are going to avail themselves to those rights, it remains to be seen. They still have 14 days within which to do so. So does Mr. Motsoeneng. But at this stage, I do not know what his instructions to me would be. And until such time, I am constrained in terms of saying, way forward. I know that is what you'd have loved to hear, but unfortunately, beyond saying he won't be reporting for duty, I cannot take the matter further than that.
Mr. Majavu, before I let you go, you know, the Western Cape proceedings also come on a day that we're seeing the SABC the parliamentary inquiry into the SABC continue its work. Some damning allegations being made again against your client. It looks like the writing is on the wall. You know, people speaking about the reign of terror that has taken place at the SABC under his watch and at his behest. These are the allegations that have been made against him. Has he at all contemplated resigning at this point? Is it still worth it for him to remain in this position?
Unfortunately, I am not his spokesperson. I don't speak for him on personal matters. I have not discussed that issue with him because he has not instructed me to deal with the parliamentary processes at all. So I think it will be unfair or foolish of me to venture or even hazard a guess. That he is contemplating to resign, it's not an issue that he ever raised with me. And I think ultimately let us allow all these processes, legal processes and parliamentary processes to run their course and give those who are involved in those space. As a lawyer, it's not my job to sit in my client's judgment or to be swayed by public sentiment. All I know is that I uphold the rule of law. I do the best that I can for my clients in a respectful, dignified, and a very honorable manner. And I encourage my clients to be seen to be abiding by the judiciary while reserving their rights. That's as far as I or any a lawyer would take. If he elects to resign, it is his call. And it does not necessarily mean that, I am his lawyer for all legal matters. I act on an instruction basis. So the parliamentary process is underway. What you refer to as damning evidence, I've seen that. Some of these things I didn't know myself, but I don't have instructions. It is really not for me to say. Is the writing on the wall? I don't know. The last time I checked, the parliamentary processes were still underway, far from over, and it may well be that Mr. Motsoeneng may or may not be invited. And until the parliamentary committee charged with this responsibility makes its findings, I think it will be a bit unfair to suggest that the writing is on the wall. It may be, but there are laws in this country. The rule of law equally applies to Mr. Motsoeneng. However much the public sentiment may be against him, but I think until I'm instructed, I would be wise not to enter that terrain. I'm sorry, my sister, I can't take it beyond that.
All right. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Hlaudi Motsoeneng's lawyer, advocate Zola Majavu, giving us the latest on the SABC front, confirming that Mr. Motsoeneng will not be showing up for work today.